One of the few bright spots for Republicans in the election this year was the Senate race, the U.S. Senate race in Arizona. Jeff Flake's race in Arizona was one of the few contested Senate seats that was in reach for the Republicans that it appeared the Republicans actually did reach. But today, the Democrat in that race, former Surgeon General Richard Carmona, kind of essentially hinted at unconceding that race. Mr. Carmona's campaign today saying they might have declared defeat too soon. They say they're now watching the vote count in Arizona very closely. As of this weekend, Arizona had not counted roughly 1 in every 4 votes that were cast in the election. Still, 500,000 votes left to count. And a bunch of close races in the state are hanging in the balance. This botched election in Arizona, which is still not over, and this remarkable potential unconcession in a U.S. Senate race by Richard Carmona today ultimately may go back to this guy.
As you know, 250 citizens of this valley, this state, came to me asking me as the head of a law enforcement agency to look into President Obama's birth certificate as released by the White House in April of 2011 on the official White House website, as we suspect it is a fraudulent document.
Sheriff Joe Arpaio of Maricopa County in Arizona revealing the results of his taxpayer-funded investigation into President Obama's birth certificate back in July. The sheriff of Maricopa County, Arizona, and a prominent Mitt Romney endorser sent his cold case posse to Hawaii, where the Arpaio posse discovered the president's birth certificate is a fraud. Sheriff Arpaio is a cartoon, but he is also a very visible political force in Republican Arizona politics. He was a big backer of Arizona's anti-immigrant Papers, Please law. He does everything possible to try to make himself nationally famous, everything from moving prisoners out of jail and putting them instead in tents in the desert, forcing prisoners under his care to wear pink underwear because it amuses him as sheriff to make them do that. He brags about making prisoners eat bologna sandwiches so rotten the meat has turned green. And then when he couldn't stand a brief lull in national attention for himself, he tried with the Obama birth certificate cold case posse thing. Now, some people in Maricopa County, Arizona, love old Sheriff Joe and his Joe Arpaio traveling circus. But some people don't like it. And this year, a group of high school kids in the county decided that they were going to take on Sheriff Joe Arpaio in his re-election bid this year. These 100 or so teenagers set up a voter registration drive that they called Adios Arpaio. Adios Arpaio had a goal of registering more than 30,000 people in the county, which is a lot of people for a county race. In October, they announced that they had beaten their goal. They were aiming at 30,000 registrations. They got over 34,000. Just a triumph of civic activism for these kids, until the realities of democracy in Maricopa County, Arizona started to take hold. Maricopa is the same Arizona county that this year told Spanish-speaking voters that Election Day was November 8th, which is 2 days after the election. Maricopa County said that was just an accident. Then we found out that the county made the same exact Spanish language accident on a bookmark that was also sent out to voters telling them when to vote. Arizona also reduced the number of polling places this year. In Maricopa, they closed a third of the polling places that had been open in 2008, when they had long lines too. So when voters got to the polls this year, they likely would have encountered big long lines just because there were fewer places to vote. And then what many of the new voters voting this time found specifically was that their names were not on the voter rolls, even though they'd registered. As a result, those new voters got forced into voting in a far from reliable way, known as a provisional ballot. And that's how Arizona found itself in the national headlines. Days after the election, Arizona still having a mountain of ballots to count. That pile including a mini mountain of these provisional ballots, many of them cast by first-time minority voters, like the 30,000 plus people who were signed up by the high school kids in Adios Arpaio. Those kids have been marching in the streets of Phoenix ever since, a core group sitting in outside the Maricopa clerk's office. They say they will stay there until every vote in that office is counted. Meanwhile, activists in Phoenix are desperately working a phone bank. They're trying to reach all the voters they reached before the election so they can figure out who got forced into voting one of these provisional ballots. Because if they made you vote that way, you only have until Wednesday of this week to go back to the county election office and prove that you voted rightfully. Otherwise, your ballot, your provisional ballot that they made you vote that way, that ballot will get thrown out. And this is not only Maricopa County's problem. You can find boxes of uncounted votes across Arizona. Depending on how you figure it, our nation woke up today with half a dozen undecided congressional races. Half of them were in Arizona. Early on, the activists in Arizona asked for help from the Justice Department. They tell us the next election matters as much as this one, so Arizona really needs to get their act together and get this right. It does seem like they are starting to get a little notice in Arizona, starting with Richard Carmona's U.S. Senate campaign saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe this thing is not over. We're going to make sure that they count every vote. This weekend, Harry Reid, the Democratic Senate Majority Leader, also signaled that he is taking this seriously, putting out a statement calling for all of the votes in Arizona to be counted promptly, accurately, and equally. Senator Reid pointing out that just in Maricopa County alone, the uncounted votes represent a major portion of the total votes cast in Arizona. Florida only finished counting its votes for president this weekend, after Floridians waited in some cases for 8+ hours to vote. And because Florida is Florida, and because of what Florida means in American national politics, Florida is probably always going to be Exhibit A for what is wrong with our election system on purpose. It's wrong on purpose because we know what needs to be done to fix those problems, and it's not being done on purpose. But Arizona right now is a hot and heavy contender at this point for at least Exhibit B in this same case. And unlike Florida, Arizona is still not even done yet, not even with this year's election. Stay tuned. There's going to be more on this. Now it's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Have a great night.